Welcome to TeamTalk from TeamKinetic, the podcast that takes a deeper dive into volunteer management. With me, Chris Martin.
Welcome to TeamTalk from TeamKinetic with me, Chris Martin.
And me, Greatbatch. TeamTalk is the podcast that dives deeper into the world of volunteer management, getting to know the people who help make volunteering happen, why they do it, how they do it, and what they want to see change. If you're new to listening to the podcast, welcome. If you have listened before, welcome back.
Oh, Imo, how's your week been this week?
Good. Feels very busy. We've got half term next week. That always creates a lot of work in the week before. But yeah, no, all good. All good.
It's our first on-location podcast. I'm actually at the World Championships of Gymnastics in Liverpool that are about to start next week. We're doing some work here with the guys in this event, and I've got to say, it's all very exciting when you get into these big events. It's been quite interesting to see what goes on behind the scenes with volunteers and the training and all that kind of stuff. So I feel like I'm right in the midst of it at the minute, and hopefully Emma, who's going to be joining us today, will be able to share some of her experiences of working on these kind of events. Emma Peat is the workforce manager from Formula E, that's the motorsport, and I know Emma from a time as the events officer at England Hockey. Emma helped us re-procure TeamKinetic and our accreditation system for England Hockey. She has a really interesting experience because she became an events officer just before COVID kicked off, so hopefully we'll get into a little bit of that as well.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Hi Emma. Yeah, how are you?
I'm really good, thank you.
Fantastic. And how's your week been?
Busy. It's all kicking off. Our season is nearing. I kind of started in my role 4 months ago, and our first race is in January. So, quite in the thick of planning now. So, yeah.
Us back to the beginning, because I feel like we jumped straight into where we are now, and there's a bit of a story about the peak pathway. How did that begin? How did you start your journey into volunteer management? And take us a little bit of where that started.
I love the peak pathway, by the way. I'm going to trademark that. It all kind of started at uni. I'm very much a sports nut. I'm a hockey player at heart, but kind of get involved in every sport. I was studying business studies at university, which is a very broad spectrum of what we learnt, really. There was no specification in there. And as I was at uni, I was part of the hockey team, and two of our women's hockey teams got cut. So me and a few of our friends set up another hockey team and ran it, coached it. So that was me dipping my toe in the volunteering side of things. I think when you're at uni, you get dragged into volunteering across various sports activities when you're there, just naturally. My entry into sports volunteering, in a way, it was very relaxed, and it didn't really feel like volunteering in a way. It was just me doing things.
How social was your club? How was your club? Or were you hard drinking?
Too social. The perfect balance, I'd say.
Of course.
Very
yeah.
But yeah. And so out of university, I moved to London and got a job at a clothing company called Hush Homeware in their customer services department, and that was with a view to move to their marketing team. That never really came into fruition just because of the direction that the company was taking. But I'd had a little bit of experience in the events world before in my placement, and also, when you're younger, working at weddings. I was always in the event space in a way. So I was always like, let me get involved in all the event stuff. So I would be doing the clothing launches, and I just loved the buzz of events. And then I think I was only there for about 11 months. And then I moved to a job in public sector forums and conferences, which wasn't as, glamorous and sexy. But again, it was a bit more of an eventsy role. And I was there for about 10 months. So you're seeing like me, I'm moving quite quickly along things here. And that's
you were trying to find your tribe, so to speak, weren't you? Trying to find the thing that...
broadening my skills, learning what I wanted to do as well as what I didn't want to do. So, starting like a really broad degree in business studies. Like, it's amazing because you get a really broad picture of business, but you don't dive deep into anything. You're basically given the whole world of business, going like, I'll go get a job. And you're like, well, just everything. And you don't even know some roles exist. Just going out into the world, getting some jobs and seeing what I like, meeting different people. So yeah, I was working in forums and conferences for a while. Yeah, it was a little bit dry. But then I saw the job for England Hockey on LinkedIn. I didn't have a huge amount of events experience, but I think my love for the sport really got me the job.
Through. Yeah.
You should have seen my cover letter. It was all about hockey. How much I love it.
See, I think that's really interesting because, you know, you come out of we've had a number of speakers on the podcast who often, when we talk about volunteer management, it's kind of a similar pattern that they don't know it's a thing. They weren't aware at university it was a thing. Even people that work in it sometimes aren't even sure it's a real job. So they're kind of like, well, you know, what do you do? I work in people or I work in HR. That it's always it's an interesting journey, and the fact that you came from that that love of the sport as well. I think sports volunteering is quite, I won't say unique in the way it's cause driven, but it's a particular facet of the experience. Is people love being part of the sport they're part of and want to be involved in it. That's player. Yeah.
100%. So my role at England Hockey, there was only like of the events team, there was only like four or three of us, depending on when you look at it. A few people left. It was a really small team, so I was looking after like equipment and logistics, the hospitality, public catering, and then the volunteer side. So again, I was getting a really broad picture of event space and learning what I liked and didn't like. And honestly, just working with the volunteers is just my favorite part. It really energized me to do my job, to come to events and like work with those people that love the sport, and it gives you a love for your job. And yeah, so that's where I just really fell in love with it. And I think I kind of came into the like volunteer space in a really lovely place, because the hockey makers, as we call them, the England Hockey volunteers, are just the most amazing people. They love the sport.
Yeah,
they want to
committed.
Want to be better. So to come into it in that space just made me fall in love with it.
But that passion-fueled environment is very energizing, as you said. But interesting, you've gone from this macro world of business studies, then into kind of like retail, over to sport, managing events. But there's such a specific need when you're managing volunteers for events around how you recruit, induct, ensure they're aware of the different roles, support, promote and recognise. How did you develop your skills and experience around kind of ensuring that journey was in place for those event volunteers or hockey makers?
I think one of the really good things about my role was I was touching a huge area of the event, which is what volunteers do. They don't just touch one area of the event, they're across the whole thing. So to get this really broad understanding of what an event looks like and how it works helped me steer that volunteer journey, because if I was just in charge of the volunteers and the people, I wouldn't be across the places that they're working and the people they're working with. So it actually really helped me to have a broader understanding in terms of, you know, delivering this end product for the volunteers. I'm not gonna like skim over it, but basically this group of volunteers have been volunteering forever. They are serial volunteers. A lot of them work on the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park. You'll see them at the Commonwealth Games. They'll start at the Olympics. So they're the specialists. I learned so much from them. I had an amazing group of event assistants, we called them. And it was a group of, I think, about 10 volunteers that had just been around forever. And in all honesty, they were such an approachable group. They wanted it to be amazing for the other volunteers. So I'd spend a lot of time on the phone to them, getting their 2 cents on things, understanding how they would want it to be delivered to them. And I think that's the thing. It's open communication with the people that you're trying to create an end product for. And it's understanding that client journey from their side of things. So I would never, I just think one of the most important things is just talking to them and understanding what they want from you. And also my boss, Nikki, at the time, her history was starting in the England hockey space as a hockey maker. So she came up through being a volunteer to being head of events. So to have that person be my mentor and teaching me about that world, she'd managed the volunteer side of things, but also been a volunteer. So that was invaluable.
And that co-creation and kind of involvement in volunteer management / engagement is so important, isn't it? And I think that story of Nikki being a mentor, you really get that awareness and appreciation of what life is like for being a volunteer. So it's not unpaid workforce, it's passionate people gifting their time to the sports that they love and feeling like they're really making an impact.
And I think a really important thing that she taught me, or that I was happy to do, like I was just always keen to get involved, and I wasn't just the volunteer manager asking them to do things. I would ask them to do things, but do it with them. So I think that was a really important thing that she taught me, the volunteers taught me, and that I have taken into every aspect of my role. I always will get stuck in. And when you're working alongside them as well, you create a really good rapport, and they respect you and they'll come to you, and that it's about opening these communication paths as well. You become like a part of their team, so they'll come and chat to you.
I love that idea of sort of shoulder to shoulder in the trenches, especially on events, because it is full on and you do ask a lot of people. And events are the sexy side of volunteering because it's nice and contained, and you get to go to great venues and you're close to the field of play and all these cool things. But it's hard graft, and you're asking a lot for the volunteers, and they're there for long shifts. So I think it is important that they do, they have that sense of you're in it together. That sense of you own the event together, and the success of the event is as dependent on them as it is on you. It's I think it's interesting. But we're thinking about that. I mean, we're talking about events. Hockey Maker program for England Hockey is really successful, and the events program's fantastic. But then volunteering across hockey as a general rule is quite different and wasn't really top down. Have you got any thoughts on the sort of the England hockey approach to volunteering in the wider sort of sense? What were your feelings and thoughts on that? Because obviously you had this amazing group of volunteers that were passionate about hockey, but it's a slightly different approach as an organisation for volunteering into the community.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the problems was there was a bit of a disparity in like how we managed that process. So I was I only looked after the event volunteers. That was my job, and that was a separate program, and we didn't necessarily carry that over into the other side of volunteering. It wasn't seen as a single thing where you're trying to improve it holistically. It was very much, I'm in charge of the event volunteers, and then there's this other area of volunteers that literally make the sport run, and it was seen as a separate entity, when really you should be looking at it holistically and how can we improve the experience. And a lot of them are doing both, so why are we changing? A lot of the volunteers that would come to the events were volunteering on the weekend. And I think one of the things would be to have a central platform where we speak to them all as one. But yeah, I think that was the main issue. It was just spoken to separately. I think just in general, the staff at England Hockey were incredibly stretched, and some things do slip through the cracks. And the fact that mine was a dedicated role, I couldn't have taken on more.
No, and exactly. What you were already doing was sort of you were at the maximum of your capacity for the events in themselves.
Everyone was at the maximum of their capacity. So I think it would have just been better to have like a volunteer team managing the volunteers, but it wasn't a reality that we could see through.
But that's a sort of challenge that the sports sector faces, I think, because whether you felt the same in hockey or what it's like when we move on to kind of moving to Formula E, but it feels like the charity sector is very well adverse to the infrastructure that's needed to support volunteers through their fundraising and their retail and their shops and their different arms. But in sport, that kind of 6 odd million people that help enable that community sport day in, day out, locally, facing whether it be parent challenges or league challenges, and often people don't appreciate that they're giving their time to do this. That's quite a big thing. That do you feel that sport properly has the infrastructure in place to support them?
I think at the moment, no, but it can look like a really scary job for an NGB to look at. We need these volunteers to deliver this sport. We rely on them so heavily, but we don't have the infrastructure and the personnel available to improve their experiences at the moment. I think we're at a risk in the volunteer sector as a whole of doubling up on a lot of work. Like, we all work in silos, when really you've got experts across the whole sphere of volunteering that have done the work before. we need to work together more. So the sporting sector needs to talk to the rest of the volunteering sector on how to improve it. It's not something we need to start from scratch at all. We can speak. I just think we need to, just within the volunteering sector as a whole, be more collaborative rather than not competing within each other. Because I think one of the problems is we're always competing with each other for volunteers' time, but we can't look at it like that. We need to just be more collaborative, and that'll, yeah.
Well, and it's interesting, Chris, that collaboration point. Sorry, I will bring it up. But I was just going to say, it's really the Association of Volunteer Managers conference just took place recently, and that's where lots of the charity sector kind of come together. And there were only a couple of sports there, I think. But it's really interesting where you talked about your event volunteers and hockey makers were based at that, like, quite place-based volunteers that were really engaged in multiple sports and that side of things. So it's that pathway is really powerful around event volunteers going into kind of different sports, and sports not being possessive over volunteers, but nurturing that kind of just exploration of different sports and not having to feel like you have to commit to it for life.
I think like the end, my dream is like at the end, it's all kind of one pool. Like the volunteers, it's not hard for them to dip between opportunities. It needs to all be seen as one place, like a forum where volunteers can dip in and out of different opportunities. Absolutely. And it means that, I think that would mean that we can attract younger volunteers as well, that are trying to use it as a skill improving process. Because I don't think a lot of younger volunteers want to lock themselves into one organization.
They don't want to work in a shop for the next 6 years. They like to have a little bit of this and a little bit of that.
And that's the thing. We had our demographic, generally it's an older demographic that volunteer, and our struggle at England Hockey was bringing like young people in. We had this one young volunteer who was coming through the ranks and becoming like the field of play manager's protege. But she'd already dedicated years to this role, and it was with the view of her becoming like the specialist FOP person. And that's a huge commitment for someone of that age. She's going off to uni, and it's a huge commitment. So I don't know, just to be able, and then her going off to uni, there's like all these, we're quite a mobile generation, as like people are moving around more, and I think that's one of the struggles as well. You feel like you can't commit to something in your geographical area, so it needs to have a bit more of a holistic approach across like the UK or the world.
It's tricky as well for any individual NGB to invest too heavily in individuals if they're not going to be with them for an extended period of time. So having some form of centralized way for volunteers to be able to move between multiple events sort of takes the pressure off any one single NGB to have to invest too heavily in an individual. But if there was sort of some framework in there, maybe a UK sports sort of led project that enabled that. I mean, we were a bit disappointed when Join In finished after the Olympic Games, because it felt like that was a vehicle that had events in its sort of sights, and having this sort of professionalized workforce that were volunteer led. So it always felt like a bit of a shame when that sort of died off, that there wasn't something that, from Sport England or UK Sport, that stepped in to replace that sort of blue chip event volunteering experience.
Absolutely,
because there's in the UK.
Yeah, I completely agree, and it would be so beneficial to the volunteering space, I think.
Yeah, I agree. There we go. We'll send this to Jenny after the pod and get a comment on it. Here we go.
Well, no, but I think it's important. Creating these conversations sparks ideas, encourages that collaboration, which helps us just kind of maybe approach things differently. And these are all, even just through this conversation, I guess it reaffirms, Emma, I don't know how close you are to the vision for volunteering that the kind of sector has put forward around, by 2032, this is the vision where we want to see volunteering. And a lot of what you've shared is echoed within that. And we've already talked about that awareness and appreciation, the collaboration, and these are all part of the key 5 themes of that vision. Interestingly, in your introduction, you talked about you started this event volunteer management just before COVID. And then how did that affect your role in supporting volunteers? And I guess the other part of that is what positives have you taken out of that from the learning into how you approach event volunteering and supporting event volunteers post-pandemic?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I wasn't like, we didn't have a huge amount of events under our belt until I went straight into COVID world. But I'd kind of built a good rapport with the hockey makers before this point. I just thought that a key thing that we needed through the pandemic that volunteering gives to people is community. And I didn't want that to fall off, when people needed it the most, really. So our event assistants started doing Zoom calls with the volunteers, keeping them engaged. I started rolling out a newsletter with just silly things like games that people could play, and then, you know, just keeping them communicating with us. We had a really active Facebook forum as well, where people were still talking to each other. In an ideal world, I would have been able to offer some online volunteering opportunities. It wasn't something that we were able to do in our role. I also went on secondment, so I was taken out of the events role a little bit. Remaining talking to the groups and trying to break down the barriers that not having a physical event space offered to us. So yeah, and I think what I've kind of learned from that, though, is there was a little bit that created barriers to some of the older generation. When we start moving things purely online, or a lot of the process online, that created barriers for people that weren't internet savvy. And as we've said, the demographic of volunteers is generally an older generation. So it's adapting our communications, but also trying not to alienate people. Because I think as we've moved further online, I think the younger generation are becoming more engaged in volunteering. And the pandemic also did that. I think it was like, I can't remember the stat, but I think 1 million people in the UK engaged in volunteering throughout the pandemic, at least once. So the pandemic brought giving back to the forefront as well. It brought different people into the volunteering sphere, and understanding that volunteering is a really important part of our community in a way. So it's holding on to that, but also trying not to alienate people in the process.
I think you were 4 weeks from a major event, were you not? So there was those challenges. There was the logistical challenges, I think, as well, from when you came back into the role, and you're going straight into an international event almost, if I remember rightly. Was it the sevens,
yeah, we had the challenges at the beginning. Yeah, we had the Super Sixes, but when we were going into it, we had the challenge that we had an event on the horizon where people had like committed their time to this event. And something I'm always really conscious of in the volunteering space is that it costs people money to volunteer. A lot of people are taking holiday, or they're having a day where they're not working. They're also paying for travel. So just really timely and up-to-date communication. Even if I didn't have a solid line on what was actually happening, it was such a hard space to understand what was going on. It's just communicating as much as you can with the volunteers and not leaving them in any doubt as to what's going on. Because the quicker that people could like cancel their trains or cancel like accommodation, it meant that they were hopefully not losing out on money. But yeah, it was also on the flip side of that, when we were coming out of COVID, was we literally went straight into a pretty big event. So it was trying to re-engage those volunteers that we hadn't brought into the event space in quite a while. But honestly, they were just so keen to volunteer again. It was probably one of the easiest recruitment drives I've ever had.
That's really interesting, because
I released the link, and within like a few hours it was full.
Across, if you take the picture across volunteering as a whole, it dropped after COVID because a lot of people didn't come back, but maybe it's because your events were mainly outdoors, and the event versus going back to a shop. I think there's an interesting questions in there about what happened for some people. Yeah. Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah. Super Sixes was indoors, but we did have a lot of volunteers not come back that we usually would have at all of our events. And a lot of them just wanted time with family. They hadn't seen their families, and to give up a weekend straight out of COVID, we couldn't expect it of them. And also there was just people that didn't feel comfortable coming back into the event space. So what we did in terms of communication around that was we identified roles that would be outside. We identified roles where people would be in a space separate from different people. So it's about, again, looking at your roles and breaking down those accessibility barriers or anything like that. And just, it's all around communication, I'd say, and giving volunteers the opportunity to come back, but like give us the parameters that they want to work within.
I think it was an important point you raised, though, and it did come up at the Association of Volunteer Managers conference as well, around the expenses and actually the cost of volunteering, and how can we possibly campaign and champion for sports to at least consider the expense policies to support people, especially with tackling inequalities being such a key kind of area. You don't want the financial element and the cost of living to then mean that becomes another barrier, excluding people from being able to gift time if they want to.
That's a really interesting point. In my role now, we work really, really closely with what we call the support staff leads in each city. So I basically have someone that's fulfilling the Formula E vision in each city and doing the recruitment. Basically, I kind of let them know what we need to hire, the roles, and then they'll bring it into fruition for me. So I basically have really open conversations with those leads about not just having a blanket solution across the board. It's about understanding where you're operating and adjusting accordingly.
The thing I thought was really interesting, Emma, with this new glamorous motorsport role that you've moved into, is the cultural differences between the countries in terms of where you have sort of more traditional sort of Western values and volunteering is the norm. That's kind of fine, but where you maybe go to places which may be slightly different, like say some of the South American countries, some of the places on the in sort of the Indian subcontinent where there is real poverty, and is there a different culture around volunteering? Have you noticed anything? I know you're only new to the role, so maybe we'll bring you back next year after you've done all the cities and get your thoughts on that. But the sort of the cultural differences around volunteering internationally, I'd be interested to get your thoughts on so far.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it kind of comes back to the whole paid thing. So volunteering in some cultures just isn't a thing. It's not like if you went out for a volunteer workforce, you wouldn't get anyone back. So that it is being like aware of these different cultural systems in different countries and adapting for that. I think one of the really important things that we do as FE is that we're kind of, from the London team, we're the planners and we build the strategy, but we have local teams in each city, and they're the ones that help us lead that strategy locally. So it's not a one size fits all. We are very receptive to what they tell us about the culture, even down to the ways of communicating. Because so we prefer using WhatsApp internally on site. It's just the easiest way for us all to communicate. But when we were in Seoul, Korea, end of last year, they just don't use WhatsApp. So it's even just like that, just adjusting the way that you communicate with people, not having a one size fits all. Like we have certain milestones that you want to hit in each city in terms of communication and delivery, but being open to change.
What would you say the kind of appreciate Chris wants you back in a year when you've had a bit more time to settle in? But what would you say are the biggest kind of differences between Formula E and then kind of the sport hockey experiences, and what are the biggest things that we can probably teach each other?
I think just the main differences is that I'm operating internationally now. I was always just based out of the UK. We just had local volunteers that were always coming back, and we had a big calendar to fill throughout the season. Whereas now I'm going into a race city for maybe 1 day or 2 days a year. And to build a engaged volunteer community or base in a country, in a city, when you're in there for 1 day, it's such a huge challenge. And so what I'm trying to do with the local volunteer lead is to build additional events throughout the season. So viewing parties for other races, maybe if there's a launch event, getting the volunteers involved in that. So it's just trying to include people throughout the year, when really I just don't want to pick people up, engage with them for a day and not speak to them until a year later and we're like, we want your time again. So that's a huge challenge that I'm working through at the moment. In the past, like the processes haven't really been centralized and there hasn't been processes in place, hence why my role's been brought in. So in a way, I'm kind of starting from scratch, which is fun and exciting and a big job. But yeah, I think it's definitely going to be maybe 5-10 years in the making to try and get us to the place that we want to be. But
Formula E is city based, isn't it? All your races tend to be city tracks. Have I got that right?
They are. We're a bit of a traveling circus. We basically drop into a city centre for a few days. Sometimes we do the build in a few weeks. Sometimes we're there for a few months. But we generally build our tracks in a city centre. So if you look at the track that we had in London, if you see the aerial view, we're going round a hotel. You can see the white lines of the car park on the track, which is really funny. But yeah, it's amazing because the difference between us and like Formula One, they have their set tracks that might be a few hours drive from the nearest town, like city. Whereas we're literally dropping ourselves into the middle of a city. We're going to touch so many people that maybe don't know about motorsport, haven't been engaged with us in the past, but we're kind of taking over a city for a day. So it's so exciting. We meet so many different people. There's a huge buzz around what we do. So yeah, it's a fun way to run an event.
Is there something at sort of an FIA level then around volunteering? Is there a conversation there that could be had, do you think?
I think there should be. I'm currently I've actually got a chat on next week with someone from Silverstone who does their volunteering program, because they've got a hugely engaged volunteer base, and it's this lack of me just feeling like I've got to start a volunteer program from scratch. I don't. There's volunteer programs already out there in the UK and in the places that we're going into. And again, it doesn't have to feel like they're doing one day of volunteering with Formula E. It's another day of volunteering with motorsport in the calendar. So it's adding it onto the motorsport calendar and getting these engaged individuals in place. I haven't had any conversations yet with the FIA, but I think it's definitely something we need to explore. There's something that we do that is driven by the FIA that's called Girls on Track, and it's about engaging young girls and women in motorsport, because as you'll know, the demographic of motorsport is very heavily skewed in the way of men. And generally I think it's really exciting that the volunteer space, even if the actual sport itself has a certain demographic, generally the volunteer space is more representative of the local community as opposed to the sport. So it's a really nice space to work in, and where you can make difference and where you can speak to different people and bring them into the sport in a way that they're not the ones competing in the sport. But yeah, there's this initiative called Girls on Track where we bring young girls, they come to our events, we'll give them talks, they'll meet people like women within the motorsport community, and they'll have conversations, there'll be talks, they'll understand opportunities in motorsport. I'm going to try and work alongside them to make sure that they're aware of our volunteering opportunities as well, and we can upskill them. It won't just be a day where we're kind of talking to them. It's a day where maybe we can talk to them on the Friday and they get involved and actually get some real world experience the day after. So yeah, it's exciting. There's some good things happening where we can all work together and bring different people in and get them involved.
It sounds really exciting. I was wondering, again, with your motorsport hat on, what's the team's thought on all this? Have you had any engagement with any of the actual teams themselves? Have they got a view to volunteering, or?
I haven't yet. Again, I'm very new in the role, so I'm trying to my way through.
Survive the first event.
I haven't yet. What we're doing at the moment is even just from the top level, I want the volunteering experience to be exciting. I want it to be something that people want to get involved in when they see it. So I'm doing a few bits of filming with the teams where they talk to the volunteers. It's a nice touch, isn't it?
It's very nice.
I think it's nice for the volunteers to know that they're valued by not only Formula E, but by the people we're delivering the sport for. It was something that we really pushed in England hockey. Sometimes after a big event, they'd get a handwritten letter from the from Holly Penweb and Adam Dixon, who were the captains of the men and women's teams. And it's just little things like that. They're delivering at the end a product, but they're delivering the sport for these people, and it's really nice for them to feel valued by the wider scope.
There's a wider society, there's a wider community that you want to to engage and develop and link it together. It shouldn't just be a thing that lands for 2 days. You kind of want it all to be sort of sewn into the wider community.
Exactly.
Well, and it makes it really purposeful, isn't it? Because there is that passion, but when you align that passion with a purpose, and the participants are almost that purpose of kind of engaging people in sport, whether it's motorsport, hockey, that's a really cool feeling to feel like I played a little part in that bigger picture.
That's the thing. So like in the past Formula E, there hasn't been a huge amount of data collected from this group. So I don't understand yet. I've got a plan, but I don't understand yet at this point any of like their motivations. I don't know the demographic of the volunteers we're working with. I don't know whether people are volunteering with us because of our sustainability work. I don't know if they're volunteering with us because they love volunteering. I don't know if they're volunteering with us because they're fans of motorsport or just because they're fans of Formula E. So there's like, even just there's 4 very different purposes to why people would want to volunteer with us. And to give back, to build this reward and recognition program, but not know that information would be really meaningless. And you can't give back the same thing to those 4 different groups of people. So it's about giving meaningful and valuable reward and recognition to these groups, not just, and I love a pin badge, people love pin badges, but not just sending them all a pin badge. there's more to it, I think.
I think as well, I mean, just from a purely sort of commercial understanding of Formula E and its value proposition, understanding what your volunteers' motivations are would be quite indicative of probably understanding what the wider population's feelings are. You have this amazing engaged audience that want to talk to you for whatever reason. So, I mean, from a purely business standpoint, I think it'd be really interesting for Formula E to understand that audience. Are they city-based people that just want to be involved in the city stuff, or are they really into the motorsport aspect, or is it a bit of both? It's a really interesting product in of itself. So
I agree. This is where I'm trying to turn the like wider company focus as well. It's always been just something that happens. I just found when I went in and was like, so where's all the data that I can build stuff on? Where's my information? And they were like, oh, we don't have any. I was like, what? So even just
it strikes you that kind of sport that would be it'd be a wash with it. You'd think it's it's so technically advanced.
They've got endless data on the fans. But it just seems to have been a bit of an overlooked thing. But obviously bringing me in, they're aware that that needs to change, and I'm there to drive that change and to really bring it to the forefront of people's minds. Because the one question that they asked the fans was, how was your experience with the volunteers on site? And it's always one of the best metrics. It always comes out top. And it's like amazing. And I'm like, this is the most amazing bit of data that I can run with, because basically they have a lasting effect on the fans, a positive effect, and they touch every area of the event. So we can create such an amazing fan experience if we upskill and engage this group. So more data will be coming, but that's kind of what I'm running on at the moment.
Well, and do you have the event volunteer experience? Is that echoed? Are they having a brilliant experience that they're kind of amplifying out, or
I don't
know yet?
Yeah. So what I'm doing in the first protocol for me was talk to our insights team. I've built a survey for season 9. So we're going into season 9 in January. But I'm also going to do focus groups. I just need to get as much information as I possibly can in the next season, so I can drive our strategy going forward, really. I think it varies race to race, and it varies in what role they are in. So say in Seoul, our event was much longer because there was something called the Seoul Festa going alongside it. But it meant that for the first 3 days, it was a really slow trickle of people coming in. So a lot of the volunteers were relatively idle for 3 days. And then on the 4th day, when they were like maybe a bit demoralized, that was the day they needed to give the show. And it was just about managing that side of things, like maybe move people around to different roles if they're going to be there for 5 days. Don't just have them standing at the same bridge the whole time. But generally, our volunteers that go in the gaming arena where the simulators are, it's a really fun space. They have an amazing time. They're like dancing. And it's about managing the difference in the roles that they fulfill as well, and making sure they all have a brilliant experience.
Interestingly, listening to you talk just then, where you talked about strategy, focus groups, market research, I think you found your marketing job, Emma. It looks like you found your marketing job that you were looking for at a university. volunteer management does have those aspects in, doesn't it? Well, it is a marketing job, a HR job, a recruitment job, having coffee and a chat job. It's all those things.
Yeah, it's been my journey through like a really eclectic list of jobs, and it was amazing in my placement to get such a wide experience. So I was in the HR merchandising team. They let me just go wherever I wanted. It's really important to build that wide skill set when you're going into a role like this, because I'm aware that there's some people I work with in the event experience team that wouldn't want to be on the phone to volunteers. They wouldn't want to have that, really customer facing, customer service aspect of things. Whereas I love it. The reason I work with volunteers, I can chat to them.
You can't tell you like a chat, Emma. You can't tell at all.
Oh, right. 100 words a minute.
I feel like we could go on for hours. It is brilliant. But I guess sort of thinking about there's so much stuff in there, Emma, and my mind halfway through this started going into kind of Sue Anstis Sport Collective with the women's space and the game on side of things that you're driving in motorsport. So you never know, Sue might listen to this and then bring you onto the Game Changers if you've not already been on that podcast.
I haven't watched this today.
Yeah, well, there you go. But I guess so, kind of summarising the reflections, you had this sort of journey where you looked at this massive picture of business studies, got your appetite kind of infused through a bit of volunteering at university, then you've gone on this absolutely incredible journey where it feels like you've just had loads of fun doing what you love, but also energizing and getting energy from supporting those amazing volunteers that support you do that and are doing what they love too. Window of opportunity is event volunteering, is what I'm hearing, and it is the platform to provide better collaboration across sport. And hearing that from you, and also motorsport is where it's at if you want to have a buzzing dancing experience. How does someone get involved with you as a volunteer if they've thought, I've listened to Emma and I want to be part of that?
So this is one of the things I'm working through at the moment. When I was looking to apply for the job, obviously the first thing I did was volunteering with Formula E. We don't have a dedicated page on our website. There's no information on how people can sign up. So I'm currently in the process of building a web page with an expression of interest for all our different events. In the immediate term, honestly, people just need to email me. I know. Yeah, but our full events calendar is on the Formula E website.
I can put that down in the description for people as well. So don't worry, Emma, I can pop that in the description for you, everyone.
That's fine. And the London event that we'll be doing this year is on July the 29th and 30th. So I assume that most people that will be listening will be based in the UK for this. Over the next few weeks, I will have a web page available on the Formula E website where people should be able to express their interest. If there's anything that actually people just want to talk to me about, if they have ideas, if they're part of motorsport already and they want to talk to me, email me. And it's emp@FIAFormulaE.com. That's me.
Brilliant.
It's amazing. Well, and Chris, are you doing the final two on you to round this up?
I always you're so good at it. Imo, you're always so good at it, so I'm more than happy to hand the responsibility over. I've got no shame in passing on to someone who's better at it than I am. So. Well,
this is where we can see, so everyone can only hear. Well, we're talking about a podcast, but I can see Emma going, "What is coming now?"
I always do this thing at the end of the podcast.
Well, literally, your head is in your hands. Don't worry, it is fun. I feel like you'll like it. So what we always finish on, Emma, is two from you. And that is basically one word from your professional kind of role working in volunteering as a volunteer manager, and one word that would kind of reflect your experiences as a volunteer. So from your uni reminiscing days. So two words, one from the day job, as it were, supporting volunteers, and the other from actual experiences as a volunteer. What would your 2 words be for us to finish on this episode?
So much pressure. So much pressure. We should always warn people on this.
So many. I've got like a word map above my head right now. Okay, let's go. I'd say energized and
Brilliant.
community.
Love it. There we go. Like them too.
Community. I definitely think we need a wordle of all these, Chris. I feel like we need a wordle.
I'm going to get all that. I'm going to pull that together. I'm going to get that pulled together for next week. Emma, it's been lovely to catch up with you. Not spoke to you for a little while, so it's great to hear how well the new job's going. I'm very jealous of the working in motorsport. It's I'm quite a fan, so good luck with it all. Good luck with the first event, and hopefully we'll speak to you again soon. And when you get all that data, you come back and talk to us about what you now know.
Yeah, where we want to go. Yeah, absolutely. No,
Exactly.
it's been fab. Yeah, I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it. If you can't tell,
and I didn't even know this whole world of motorsport existed. So I feel like I'm a new fan that will be looking at that expression of interest ever, and I've been really excited that Chris has introduced us. So that the perks of being a co-host, hey.